Hello everyone. Hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. My name is Leyli Seifi. I'm associate professor at the University of Birjan, Iran, and currently serving on IFLA library service to the multicultural population section as a chair. On behalf of Library Service to the Multicultural Population Section, Research and Action Committee, and Free Libraries Network, India, I welcome you all. I would like to thank IFLA headquarters for their support and for providing the Zoom platform, especially Stephen Weiber, the Director External Affairs, for his continued support in coordinating this webinar. So today's webinar is about caste discrimination and introduction for libraries in order to learn about the nature and impact of caste discrimination on how it can manifest itself in libraries. We have three distinguished speakers, Dr. Chinaya Jangam, Associate Professor in the Department of History at Carleton University, Ottawa, Canada, and Dr. Michel A.L. Villagran, Associate Professor at San Jose State University, School of Information, USA, and Akash, Mr. Akash, sorry, Mr. Akash Solanki, PhD candidate at the in anthropology and South Asian studies at the University of Toronto, Canada. We will have actually our Q&A at the end of the webinar after all three speakers' presentations. So before I introduce our first speaker, a few Zoom housekeeping details to keep today's event running smoothly. Comments are welcome in the chat box at any time, and if you have any questions regarding the webinar, please type them in the chat box. And for questions regarding the webinar, please put your questions in Q&A box. The webinar is in English and you will receive the recording after the webinar. So we are honored to welcome our first speaker. I just give you a brief introduction for our first speaker. Dr. Chinaya Jangam is an associate professor in the Department of History at Carleton University, Ottawa, Canada. He was a visiting scholar at the Department of South Asia Studies. He writes on the social and intellectual history of Dalit and the anti-caste movements in modern South Asia. His first book, Dalits and the Making of Modern India, was published by Oxford University Press in 2017. And it presents the critical role of Dalits in the imagination and making of modern India. His translation of the seminal Dalit text Gabalian Bhat by Garam Joshua, father of Dalit literature in Telugu, was published at Gabalian Bhat, a Dalit epic by Yoda Press in 2022, and winner of the Association for Asian Studies. And A.K. Ranjanam Prize for Translation 2024. He was awarded Felix and Harry Frank Guggenheim Foundation scholarships for doctoral studies. He was a postdoctoral fellow at the International Center for Advanced Studies, New York University. He is finishing two book manuscripts on the long Dori history of caste in South Asia and a memorial based on his mother, Juguni Chinoboy. He co-founded of the South Asian Dalit Advocacy Network in Canada. With this introduction, I'm honored to invite Dr. uh, Dr. Janga for presenting his speech. Dr. Jangam, floor is yours, please.
Thank you, IFLA, for inviting me for this, and Jai Beam to you all, and thank you all for joining to listen to me. And I have a presentation slides I will just share with you. And uh, just basically, I feel very privileged to be part of this conversation, and particularly in the context of how important reading rooms are for social emancipation and social transformation. And my own experiences as a child, uh, like I used to we used to go and line up for the Soviet supported these mobile libraries which used to come in vans to villages, the translation of books, and that's how we got into reading culture. And I think access to reading is very important step forward in terms of social transformation. So I'm an historian, and I thought my duty is to tell to the audience here about what is caste, and how does it manifest, and what is its history. Because many times what happens is that because India got independence, many times people try to say that because Indian constitution prohibits practice of untouchability, caste discrimination, they think that caste doesn't exist. But caste is a reality, and it determines access to education, access to libraries, access to public spaces. So in this context, I will provide you this broad overview of what actually caste is in India, and how it affects, how it originated. And the caste is also connected to access to education. I think that is very central to understanding what it means. So in that context, what I present is, I come from a Dalit background. And Dalits, as as a untouchable communities, were prevented from education for centuries together. Only in colonial times Dalits got access to education. So in this context, the caste history which I present is very different from you normally read about caste system written by privileged caste Hindus, no, either historians or sociologists or anthropologists. So in this context, and all other important aspect is that how does caste this historical perspective will help you understand the present context of mm, uh, rise of movements which actually the right wing movements which actually denigrate the idea of social justice and inequalities, and also access to public education. And in that context, I think libraries are very important here. So a caste as a institution existed. It is like a more than 3,000 year old institution. And then it originated in ancient India, but how it persisted all through different transformations, like ancient to medieval to modern. And in this context, uh, caste remained a foundation for South Asian civilizations. Across South Asia, what you see is that caste becomes a foundational idea on the basis of which most of the structures, both political, economic, and social structure, was built on. So in this context, what you see is that caste as a hierarchical social system determines the access to resources, access to different sorts of things. So in this context, what you see that if you really want to understand caste as a social system that denies access to institutions and resources, we have to have this longer long duration understanding of history of caste. So if you don't know what how caste works in Hindu religion, that in Hinduism everyone is born into caste system. They don't No one can deny that he doesn't have a caste, because in caste system what happens is that once you are born, like Hindu religion imagines that everyone is born into uh, caste, and the creator, the Brahma, basically all human beings but are born from the body of the god. If you look at the pyramid structure, the from head Brahmins came, who are actually priests and also custodians of education. And the second one is Kshatriyas, are the people who are warriors and rulers. They came from the shoulders of the god. And then the third one is Vaishyas, or merchants and people involved in mercantile activities, were born from the thighs of the creator. So and the last one were born from the you know feet of the creator. And Dalits and indigenous people, who are also known as Adivasis, were born out of the caste system, because that's the reason why they are known as people without any caste, casteless people. So in this context, another important thing is that it works on the basis of the whole principle of purity and pollution. And the higher you are, the more pure you are; the lower you are, the less pure you are. So in this context, what happens is that the caste hierarchy, like a ladder, it acts. And another important thing is that castes are divided into watertight compartments. So in this context, what you see is that these idea that that caste basically originates from, it's a divine creation. And then what happens is that after Vedic period, you have all these very important sacred different sort of law givers, basically people who coded the system. They started giving, like Gautama, Apastamba, Vashishta, Baudayana. These are very important lawgivers in ancient India who have coded. And in that context, what you see is that even Jain and Buddhist literatures also talk about caste system. And the epics Ramayana and Mahabharata, if you are from South Asia, you will be very familiar. Very important epics, and acts as a moral guide. Basically, one of the important aspect about these epics is that upholding caste system is the central duty of the ruler. So in this context, what happens is that from ancient India, you have this very foundational ideas about caste system, which actually originates in ancient India and continues. And what you see that at each age, like you have this lawgivers or codifiers who basically started giving this sort of justification, both ideological and also religious justification for the caste system. So in this context, what you see is that you come across this caste as an important thing. And another important thing about this thing is that caste system, the prohibition of education to both Dalits and also Shudra communities. So the law basically prohibits education to any people who are not supposed to be coming from the lowest caste background, particularly Shudras and Dalits and Adivasis. So in this context, what happens is that for centuries together, education was a prerogative of people who come from privileged caste background. Especially in the beginning, it was Brahmins, but afterwards, what you see is that Kshatriyas and Vaishyas also, because they are known as Dvija communities who are eligible for Vedic rituals, they were able to have access to education. So in this context, what you see is that till the coming of colonialism, less than 3% of the population in India have access to education. So in that context, like in a country of now we have more than 1.3 billion people, 1.2 something like that. So what you see that you see how many millions of people were denied education for centuries together. So in this context, what you see is that like these coding, one of the important thing is that along with denial of access to education and resources, and also the latex also codified cruelty in terms of violence against people who actually mm, violate caste rules. And in that context, what you see is that you ancient to medieval time, particularly, we have this understanding that Islam doesn't recognize inequality, and in front of God everyone is equal. But contrary to that, what happens is that when they come to India, and they don't intervene in caste system. Instead, what they do is that they start forming both intellectual and also political alliances with the Brahmanical elites. So in this context, what happens is that Islamic intervention in India doesn't disturb or doesn't change much in terms of caste structure. Instead, what happens is that the Islamic scholars in medieval time, so they were very much enamored by what do you call the Sanskrit and Brahmanical texts. In fact, they started translating the old Sanskrit texts into both Persian and Arabic. And if you look at 8th and 9th centuries, Baghdad, for example, had this Sanskrit text taken to Baghdad, and they were translated into different languages. So in this context, what you see that you have a very interesting thing, like the Brahmanical and Islamic elites started forming these alliances. And one of the important thing is that translations becomes very important, both seminal Sanskrit texts into both Persian and also Arabic. And in this context, what happens is that you have these elites, both Islamic elites and also both political and intellectual elites and also Brahminical elites, both Brahmins and Kshatriyas, forming political and familial alliances with Islamic conquerors and also people who have come into the India. So in this context, what you see that wow, the indifference of Islam to caste is a very important part of the medieval time. And in this context, another important thing is that naturalization of caste inequality was another important thing. Like in this context, what happens is that you have this very caste by end of the medieval time. You by the time colonialism comes into India, you see that caste was the foundation, and also interlocking gears of caste oppression are one of the important thing about caste system is that it also the unpaid and unfree labor is central to the idea of caste production. So in this context, what happens is that people coming from artisanal background, artisanal communities, or coming from Dalit background or laboring communities, they are not paid in money. So in that context, what happens is that caste based exploitation in terms of duties to serving the upper caste becomes very important. That's why the early modern times, particularly when Europeans have come to India, one of the important thing is that India is producing, contributing to global economy. Almost 30% of products in global economy were produced in India, which is based on unfree and unpaid labor of caste. So in this context, what you see is that Europeans, when they come, like Vasco da Gama in 1498, we all know. So what they do is that they also they were confused, but one of the important things for them is that the efficiency of cost exploitation was an important model for them. So therefore, the early Jesuit missionaries also, what you see that like Islamic scholars, you also see that they were also very much enamored by Sanskrit texts and Sanskrit languages. So with this, what you see that the early Jesuits also translated most of these texts and missionaries, and one of the important aspect about missionaries, both Protestant missionaries and Jesuit missionaries in early modern South Asia, is that they took the books, basically Sanskrit texts, into Europe and translated them into Latin and other European languages. With this, what you see is that you have Sanskrit knowledge and Sanskrit texts who are becoming very central to the idea of development of enlightenment thinking. And in this enlightenment thinking, one of the important thing is that the interconnection between race and caste is very central. So we think that caste is a peculiar South Asian phenomena, but actually caste is a template on the basis of which the racial oppression and racial hierarchies were developed. So in this context, what we have to understand is that when we think about racial inequality and racial oppression, it has a very important historical connection to caste based oppression, because these Sanskrit texts will tell them how the caste intricacies and discrimination helps in terms of maintaining power inequity and also resource inequity. So in this context, what I see is that like people like Voltaire, for example, was very important person in Enlightenment time, who was enamored by again the Sanskrit texts, and he was in fact reading Yajurveda. And you also see people like Karl Marx, Immanuel Kant, Spinoza, and Nietzsche, and all these people talking about caste as an important category through which they try to look at the world. So therefore, what I say is that when we want to understand racism in the world, racial oppression in the world, you have to see that it is connected to caste system. And in this context, what you see is that so you see that colonialism, Orientalism, and also one of the important things about colonial context and the development of Orientalism, if you are very familiar with it, this whole idea that exoticization of South Asian cultures, particularly the Sanskrit based cultures, in which basically this whole idea of unchanging, and also another important thing is that spirituality of the Brahmanism. So that's why you see that in contemporary context, why did yoga becomes this global phenomena where all these white people are putting yoga mats and trying to do yoga. And if you meet any white person, they say that first thing they tell you that they do yoga. And also this whole idea that India, the Brahmanism and Hinduism is being this cow loving and also yoga centric and vegetarianism. all this part of this larger, oriental creation in which colonialism played a very important role. Therefore what you see that, when you see that in South Asians particularly, you know are seen as a different sort of immigrants, where successful and also model minority, it comes from this. Most of the 90% of the immigrants from India, till very recent times, come from caste privileged backgrounds, who had access to education for centuries, and their success in North America or Europe is nothing but their caste privilege, which basically helped them to navigate this system. So in this context, what you see that, you also see that, and another important thing is that even in sociological anthropological understanding of caste, what you see that, like they also, the mainstream writings mostly saw that, caste as this consensus, wherein which, the oppressed castes and also the oppressors had this understanding that, this is how the system should work. So in this context, the consensus model, the mainstream sociology, what it did is that, it tried to present caste system as even in North American writings. Like if I go to classroom and ask students, they think that, it is just a division of labor, and people work according to their caste, occupation, and it's a very, that provided a social harmony. But that's not the way in which it works. And that's what, like, one of the important aspect about anti-caste perspective or Dalit perspective is that, the challenging this existing, you know conventional understanding of caste. In this context, what you see is that, the Indo-Aryan racial purity, basically, which actually becomes very important, in scholarship, also plays a very important role. And in this context, what you see is that, what I'm trying to tell you is that, this I in understanding caste, what you see is that, you, like, even now swastika and also the Aryan race theory idea is very central to, the white supremacist language and white supremacist ideology. So this again comes from, again, the Brahmanical supremacy, which actually plays as an important model. And the mainstream, scholarship, they never acknowledge, alternative and anti-caste imagination, and how there is an important, parallel which existed all through history. And in this context, what you see that, like then historically, what you see is that, you have this very interesting ancient Indian historians writing about caste system, who actually tried to use again Brahmanical text to tell us that, how caste evolved historically. And then so with this, and when we come to post-colonial, presentation of caste, again, this is a very interesting thing, you keep in mind, because what you see that in North America, post-colonial theory, post-colonial writings are very, very important part of South Asian academia. And the post-colonial project, what it does is that, they try to present that caste is a creation of colonialism. And they say that, what we understand, like for example, famously, castes of mind by, uh, very important South Asian anthropologist, Nick Dux, where, he says that, the way we understand caste is a production of, colonialism, British colonialism. But in reality, what happens is that, uh, Nick Dux, Bernanke, and Partha Chatterjee, by, ascribing the origin of caste and the way we see caste today to colonialism, they absolve Brahmanism, role of Brahmanism, Brahmanical elites in perpetuation of caste inequality. And in this context, what you see is that, the post-colonial understanding, in the end, what you see is that, it also became an important weapon in the hands of the right-wing forces, where, they try to say that, there was no caste before colonialism, it is colonialism which created. So in this context, you have this very interesting idea, like in South Asian understanding of caste, in a very, very, nuanced and also very different way. And so with this, what you see is that, what I'm trying to tell you is that, like education and access to resources in South Asia were determined based on birth into caste. In South Asia, everyone is born into caste. And like if you want to identify caste, of a person, the last name will give out which caste he comes from. So therefore, what you see that, caste is exists even in South, outside India. Like, all the immigrants who are here, diasporic communities, you see that, the kind of organization they establish, the kind of social interactions they have, these are all based on their caste privilege. And So what to conclude, what I want to tell you is that no, caste is one of the oldest form of inequality in human history, along with gender, and it is also codified. It is not just oral transmission which happened throughout history. You see that each age there are texts, there are codifiers, there are lawgivers who actually made it a point to uh, you know perpetuate caste system. And another important thing, as in the beginning I said, like throughout history in South Asia, caste was the foundation on the basis of which political formations have developed, and most importantly, without which you would not have had this efficient political and cultural system which survived all this time. So in this context, what you see, even colonialism for that matter, instead of talking again, doing any sort of reformist thing, colonialism, what it is that it assimilated the caste into elites into the colonial structures, and in fact it made it efficient and also visible to people, because that's how they try to uh, you know uh, perpetuate the colonial power. And the last, again, as I said, Sanskrit becomes very important model for European Renaissance, and race and caste are in this way connected globally, and that's how as European colonialism spread, and racism and casteism are very important ideas through which it spread. Thank you, and Jai Bhim.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jangom. It was very informative. I personally learned a lot. So we will have, as I said, our Q&A at the end of webinar for all speakers. Now we are going for our second speaker. So I'm introducing a brief bio of our second speaker, Dr. Michelle A.L. Villagoran is an accomplished educator, innovative speaker, entrepreneur, cultural intelligence, and diversity and inclusion expert with over 30 years of experience in the public and private sectors. As an associate professor at San Jose State University School of Information, her research focuses on diversity and social justice in library information science and cultural intelligence phenomena within the libraries. She earned her Doctor of Education in Organizational Leadership with her dissertation on cultural intelligence in 2015 at Pepperdine University. She also completed her Master of Dispute Resolution and Certificate of Dispute Resolution with Pepperdine at the University of North Texas. Dr. Viligaran completed her MLISC degree in legal informatics and her MBA in strategic management. She's involved with numerous associations, including holding elected, nominated, and appointed roles, respectively, with Performa, National Performa, Los Angeles, the Association for Library Information Science Education, and the International Federation of Library Association and Institutions, IFLA. She is the recipient of several awards, including the 2023 American Library Association Social Responsibilities Roundtable Herb Biblio Outstanding Leadership Award for Social Justice and Equity, the 2021 Performa Librarian of the Year, and the 2021 Association for Librarian Information Science Education Norman Horrocks Leadership Award. So with this intro, I would like to invite Dr. Valagaran. Floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hopefully you can see my slides and we're good to go. Okay. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I have to say, Dr. Jagan, I learned so much from you and I took a bunch of notes. So I really appreciate your overview and historical context, because this is not an area of my expertise. So I'm here to learn from actually both of you as well. I'm here to also give a little perspective based on the United States where I am located. So really to help, raise awareness among those in the audience and those in libraries to understand what's going on in the United States, how this might be appearing in your libraries, and also, what our responsibilities are and what actions or practical steps we can take. So thank you to IFLA's Library Services for Multicultural Population section, and the Research and Action Committee of IFLA member, and the Free Libraries Network India for organizing and hosting this. So here's my agenda. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the first point because, as I said, our former speaker, Dr. Jagam, did a great job with that, but I will focus more on talking about a little bit of the myths and misconceptions here in the US, as well as the legal and political context, and then how this applies and what you could do in your own library or information space. So here was my slide about what is caste. I think the main point for me to say, to add on to what's already been spoken, is that we might immediately think that this is only associated with, say, South Asia, which is not accurate at all. It's relevant to us in the United States. It's relevant to understanding the diaspora communities in the US. It's relevant to the library end users we serve. It's relevant to your colleagues that might be colleagues within your organizations. And caste discrimination may be hidden, but it is present. It's a real inequity issue, even within the United States communities. So how it manifests in the United States. I was a former law librarian. So I actually, when I was putting this presentation together, I was looking in library literature, and I didn't find not a lot at all, to be honest, specific to caste discrimination. So I went to the legal literature and found some really great resources, specifically in legal journals and law reviews. And so there's quite a bit, actually, I would say, in the discourse on the legal side, but not, again, as I said, in, say, libraries. And there's a lot also now, more recently, within higher education. The legal argument that I kept seeing over and over is the claim that caste discrimination is recognizable under federal law, so under federal employment law, under our Civil Rights Act of 1964, because caste-based discrimination can be framed as race, which we've heard, even religion or national origin. And this comes from, and the resources are at the end, but this comes from a Harvard Law Review article. However, in most places, in most jurisdictions, caste discrimination is actually not recognized, not explicitly a protected category. It's only become in more recent years that now we're having these conversations in the US, and we're starting to see more legal stance taken, whether it's at the city level, local level, or even state level, and somewhat federal. There was an interesting survey in 2018 that found that the respondents who identify with Dalit, or the lowest caste, around 40% reported experiencing discrimination in schools. So we're seeing this present in schools, and not just higher education, also in our lower level, so elementary, middle, and high school. So the concept of the caste system, it's actually been present in the United States since around 1965. So fairly recent in my mind, so early mid-60s. And this is when there was actually a federal immigration law that was overhauled that resulted in immigrants from some Asian countries coming into the United States and receiving visas. And from this, there was a lot of focus on skilled labor, a lot of focus on individuals establishing themselves in the United States. And the issue became more prominent even recently, partly because of the rise of the Hindu nationalist movement in Indian politics, which reinforced the caste divisions. And so in California, where I'm located, I'm actually in Los Angeles, not in San Jose, but in California, there was an early example in the 90s. So in 99, where federal prosecutors actually charged Berkeley real estate giant, I don't know if I have the name right, Lucky Reddy Bali Reddy, as well as his brother, sister-in-law, and other family members for smuggling Indian women into the United States. So it was an illegal sexual activity. And so they actually were taking advantage of the system to exploit these women. And they were convicted, or at least he was, and spent 8 years in federal prison and then died. Now, also in California, we have fabulous state senator Ashiba Wahab, who introduced legislation in 2023 that would add caste as a protected category in California's anti-discrimination law. It was a bill that was passed by a wide margin. I don't have the exact numbers, but a wide margin in the state and Senate. However, in October of that same year, 2023, our California Governor, Gavin Newsom, vetoed the bill, claiming that the state's discrimination laws were sufficient to protect citizens from caste bias. So that was disappointing for me to find out, living in California myself. But it is present, and these are just a few accolades and examples from the literature. But there's been a lot of reports of social exclusion as well as the housing discrimination. And this is among students as well, not just, common citizens or, professionals. And that as well for those that might be facing mental health impacts, which we're seeing more and more in the United States. So let me briefly cover some myths and misconceptions. And I think a lot of these are right on point, at least from what I'm hearing today and from what I learned in putting this presentation together. Again, this is not only happening in other places. This is happening here in the United States. Research indicates that we have colleagues, we have students, we have library end users that might identify and therefore are being impacted. So it's a fact that research shows that this discrimination is occurring in our workplaces and in our universities. Additionally, there's this myth that race or even ethnic, there's protections under the law that already cover caste, which is inaccurate. It is not listed as a protected category specifically and explicitly. Caste has unique cultural mechanisms, and it is not, as we saw, with the law that was then vetoed, not incorporated just at the state level in California. So this is why awareness matters and why hopefully all of you are here today to learn more about this and the impact in your organizations. Also, there's this myth, it might not be relevant to our library or our libraries. Well, it is relevant, as I mentioned earlier. The more awareness we can spread, the more things we can do to help this populations, and the more things we can do to look at our collections, and I'll give some practical steps shortly, the better off we are being responsible individuals, I would say, as well as ensuring that this discrimination is not occurring. And there is this last point here. I was trying to find statistics or like hard data around what's happening in the United States, and it's very difficult. There's your discussion on, say, policy front and on the legal side, but I couldn't find a lot of hard data, so I'd love to see future research in the United States on this topic particularly. Now, I mentioned some of this. Again, we have here, the federal law and scholars saying, it's been challenged, but it's still not explicitly named, nor is it a protected category within the federal law. And if we look just at city and states or local jurisdictions, and for example, I'm with a California State university system. We have 22 campuses in California. And we did add caste to our anti-discrimination policies. And we're the largest public university in California. And so we agreed to protect caste oppressed students from discrimination after years of on-campus activist work. Though, if we look just back to the federal level, there's been that lack of explicit actions taken. Most state civil rights agencies don't even track caste as a discrete category. And this comes from a huge report that Rutgers put out, which is where I was trying to find, again, that hard data and could not find for tracking to understand and see what's going on in each jurisdiction. So there's that limited data there. And while your libraries, say, may have, non-discrimination or anti-discrimination policies you follow, check if caste is even listed as a category. And if not, you may need to revise, your statements, maybe HR practices and your community policies that you have already in place. There are many lawsuits, we'll say, and institutional policy changes, specifically in kind of the tech space. The Harvard Law Review talked a lot about this related to Cisco, for example, Google, and other tech giants. And so there's a lot of things happening on that front as well as on higher education. And additionally, I'll say that Seattle, Washington, which is a state in the Pacific Northwest, a city in Washington, actually became the first city to explicitly ban caste discrimination in housing, employment, and public accommodations. But I'm waiting for the trickle down. Aren't we all, taking action and following suit? So impact on libraries. So why should you care? All right, like we talk a lot about, and I think we do a lot of talking, right? But it's about taking action. But we do discuss and dialogue about a lot of things going on related to diversity, equity, inclusion. But it's so critical that libraries, we serve diverse communities that might include, our Asian friends, immigrants, diaspora. This awareness of caste discrimination can actually help ensure inclusive service, avoid reinforcing that exclusive piece. Also ensuring that our libraries are holding diverse experiences, diverse programming, look at your collections, making sure that you're including those of potentially marginalized caste groups in diaspora. And also designing your outreach that really recognizes maybe less visible forms of discrimination. And since this, I would say, is a form in the United States that's not, discussed often, not explicitly seen in our policies and our procedures, this is an opportunity for us in libraries in the United States to actually take some action and really look at our outreach, look at our policies. And within libraries, this is also, think about bias, just as an individual and the bias you might have against particular communities coming into the library. So being aware of like less recognized forms of discrimination can help even build a more inclusive organization. So it has relevance across several, from access to equity to representation, etc. And these are, I'll call them signs, I guess, or, red flags, if you will. Things to think about when you're looking at your organizations. So if you're collecting feedback, whether it's from library end users, community feedback, even internal feedback from colleagues in your library, are they feeling excluded? Are they being, unheard? And are these individuals from this particular diaspora? And then is there a lack of representation? I think this is huge. We need to look at our materials and our collections to see what do we have in our collections? What are we offering? And do you have, workshops or events where there's actually training on, anti-discrimination, but caste is embedded and included? So all opportunities. If you don't have these are opportunities for you to take some action. And so practical steps. There are many. I'm trying to give, my short 20 minutes, just some practical things we can do in our libraries. And I think, firstly, I always say, look at your policy and procedures. So I would like to encourage everyone, if you're in a library or information setting, to look at those policies and see, are they, and do they include caste? Or at minimum, is there discussion? Is it being excluded? Maybe you need to revise those policies. Training is so beneficial. And I would say for everyone, not just staff, but training on this. Like this webinar is a great first opportunity, but seeing how it can affect your libraries, how it's affecting others in our spaces. You might have library end users that come in that have children that are going to a school where this is present. So how can you also help support them? I mentioned auditing your collections. So checking for representation, what's embedded in your collections, as well as your events and programming, or having discussions. This could be, at a staff meeting, this is the topic, we're going to discuss this further. Maybe there's been a scenario that occurred, so working through that as a team. And you can also partner with organizations. There's several out there that are actually offering caste equity awareness trainings and other opportunities, so you can learn more and bring that into your libraries. Other steps, creating safe spaces. So those that do feel marginalized due to caste feel more welcomed and are not, you know, feeling discriminated against. And ensuring your staff understand the possibility, right, of this discrimination. I think that's common sense and goes without saying, but with training and awareness. And the feedback piece, again, is critical. And I mentioned it earlier with patrons, but also your staff internally and your hiring processes. I don't think I have that on here, but now that I think about this, that's even more important. What are your hiring practices and processes, and even where you recruit, and how this ties to, you know, do you exclude a particular group in your recruitment? And could it be those that are part of the caste community? And then resources. So developing resources that you could share. Maybe it'll be, you know, it could be a bibliography, a LibGuide, some resource where you can share it with your patrons, and also incorporate, you know, the report, several resources I've included here. So my call to action, and then I have, I think, 2 more slides. My call to action is, I want to emphasize the research on caste discrimination in the US is still very bleak, we'll call it. Many institutions do not even track caste, you know, making systematic study difficult. So a call for more data collection in our libraries, data collection in our educational institutions about how caste may be affecting, you know, information access, how it may be affecting library use, community engagement, how it might be affecting our personnel, but also thinking about the policy landscape and how that's evolving. So this is also an action, I think, to, you know, talk with your city council, talk with your state representatives, and see what changes we could make or put into action. And also encouraging you to collaborate with advocates, researchers, or even policymakers that might be doing work in this space, but also so that you can make the awareness more known even with them, so they incorporate it even into their research. So here's my questions for you, but you don't have to answer right now. But how might caste show up explicitly or implicitly in a community or library? What's one change you could you initiate? And what challenges might arise when adding caste awareness to DEI, which is actually a big thing. I mean, right now in the US, with several of our states that, you know, are under the gun and under fire because of DEI practices and initiatives. So with that, here's the references. You have them and my info, and I'll turn it back over to our lovely team.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for this great presentation and giving perspective from USA. Even I myself was thinking that maybe in USA we have caste discrimination. So thank you so much. We will have a question at the end of the webinar. I'm going to introduce our third and last speaker, Mr. Akash Solanki. So Mr. Akash is a PhD candidate in anthropology and South Asian studies at the University of Toronto, Canada. He is a member of the Free Libraries Network. In addition to being a free library activist and organizer, his research and teaching lie at the intersection of digital infrastructure, technocratic expertise, and democratic governance in the global south. Drawing on an interdisciplinary background in anthropology, history, and computer science, his work brings an ethnographically grounded and globally comparative approach to the anthropology of technopolitics, bureaucracy, and public life, one that connects South Asia's digital state experiments to the media, infrastructure, and institutions that shape 21st century global governance. So with this short intro, I would like to invite Mr. Akash Solanki. Please, floor is yours.
Thanks, Lily. Can everybody hear me?
Yes,
Okay,
Akash.
thanks. Thanks, Lee, for that introduction, and thanks to IFLA, in particular Stephen, for getting us together. Stephen's been engaging with us patiently for quite some time to get Prof. Viagran and Prof. Jangam together. I'll set it out at the outset that a lot of you would have registered for this seminar not expecting me, but director of a very amazing library in Delhi, Mausam, who runs the community library project in Delhi, Mausam couldn't be with us, and I'm going to see how I might be able to fill in for her. Mausam's plan was to talk in much more detail and granularity about what it means to run a library under persistent conditions of state neglect, kinds of neglect that we are familiar with internationally, but take on very peculiar and specific kinds of challenges when you are combining the context of caste, post-coloniality, and other challenges under the current economic context in Global South. Okay, so my plan is to run through 3 broad points. We are also taking this up as an opportunity to introduce those of you who may not be aware of us. We are a fledgling organization, the Free Libraries Network India. The second bit is, like I said, to fill in some rather big shoes to tell you about the Community Library Project and its defined success of working and not just surviving but thriving in a city of close to 30 million people. And lastly, I hope to add to what the previous 2 speakers have said and explained by drawing our attention to questions of public finance and austerity. Again, matters that I'm sure most of our audiences, especially those of you who work directly in libraries or in public systems, are aware of. But I hope to add a little Indian spice to that conversation. So the Free Libraries Network came about right around COVID, right before COVID. Roughly around 250 or more community libraries independently run either as foundations or independent committed individuals who've set these libraries up had been parallelly functioning, some for long, some for a short time period. And it is around late 2010s, 2019, 2020, that the Free Libraries Network for India and South Asia overall was set up. Now, India is a country, but it's also a subcontinent. The 250 plus libraries map is very minuscule compared to the size and scale and the demand of the Indian problem, knowing that India does not really have a standardized public library system. There are some good parts, lots of bad and ugly parts. So in that sense, this initiative of rather stretched, thinly funded, largely individual initiatives is nevertheless a hopeful occurrence. The community came together with 3 core priorities. One is that we have to run free libraries, so no fees, no membership fees. Second is that we are not going to ask for documents. Again, this is a problem or a context that those of you in the global north are also increasingly becoming sensitive to, and the United States in particular over the last year or so. And lastly, that the library is an anti-caste. It's a project of not free as in free beer or free items, but free speech and freedom. Whether we draw that genealogy from Ambedkar's educate, organize, agitate, or from abolition, or from Paulo Freire's education for the oppressed, and so on and so forth. This is the context, or this is the challenge. This is the set of challenges that the Free Libraries Network is hoping to address. So like I said earlier, free libraries as a generalized countrywide system do not exist in India. The question of libraries is managed at the level of the sub-nation or the province. So there are provinces which do decently well. Again, not as well as we would like, but there are still parts of the country which do well. Some of them I've marked here in blue for you, largely. If you see, this is peninsular India. These are also parts of the country where population density is low, unlike, say, in US, where the economically better off parts is where population density is high. In India, the situation is different. Peninsular India does well in both having legislation to back the bureaucratized service delivery of libraries. However, I will mark here that we do not know, to our best information, there are no library systems in the country, whether they are government or otherwise, except for the one that we represent and we run, where membership is free. Even government library systems require, even if you are really, really poor, to pay membership fees, which itself creates a major access and inequality problem, given the large majority of Indians. India still has very low per capita income, as some of you may know, and does have some of the highest shares of poor people. And inevitably, a large number of these poor people belong to oppressed castes because of the historical colonial and post-colonial context that Chinaya spoke to you about. What has been happening in terms of whatever paltry system of allocation for funds, etc., exists? The broad pattern is that government funds from the federal government of India to libraries across the country have been shrinking. Not only are allocations shrinking, but the amount of support money for libraries after being allocated is also shrinking. And the number of libraries being supported year on year in the last decade is also shrinking, which is quite an alarming situation. Now, this graph, the green color or yellow color has no space, as you will see. What this graph represents is that on average, in India, only 11 rupees, which amounts to roughly 10 cents, 10 US cents, is spent per person per year in India on library services. Even some of the best states, like I said, let me go back to the previous slide. Even some of our best states in peninsular India actually do not meet any of the international benchmarks for good quality services. This I borrow from a friend and colleagues of the Free Network, Dr. Pradeep Balaji, who's been following up on the researching on public finance. If you see, India is really at the bottom, even when the need for public libraries is humongous, both in terms of where the country is, in terms of its development trajectory, socioeconomically speaking, and if we were to think about India, given its democratic nature, as a hope for democracy globally, the missing component of libraries is a really urgent problem. What I want to flag here is, again, a fact that especially those of us joining from the South, global South, will appreciate. But increasingly, those of you who are following US politics and elsewhere will also empathize or relate with, is that consistently every time demand for increasing funding in social services, not just libraries, but you will relate with those in education, in health, and so on. Every time such demands are placed on bureaucrats and technocrats, the response we get is that there is no money, because so much of the money is going into interest payments, and these interest payments are going into private equity or the World Bank and the IMF and so on, right? So we are both in the South as well as the North caught in this spiral of austerity in our public finances. And it is library institutions, teachers, health workers, such as those in the NHS, or in the National Health Mission in India are facing essentially similar crises. It's just that the genealogy of these crises are slightly different. So if the United States austerity crisis may have begun during the Reagan administration in the early 70s, India joined the ranks 25 years later in the mid 90s in cutting its social services. But circa 2025, while the numbers and the difference between those numbers may be different, but marginalized communities across United States, UK, elsewhere in the world, across South and North are facing same problems. I'll just give this as an example, which is on buses and public transit, right? Which is the same, which faces the same challenge because buses, like education or like libraries, where there is investment required in human capital. So you need to invest in drivers, mechanics, maintenance workers. You have to invest in librarians and library staff. You have to invest in teachers and teaching staff. There is a insistence to not want to invest on part of bureaucrats and technocrats in what are considered operational expenditures or recurring expenditures. And as a result, large amounts of public funds that we pay as indirect and direct taxes, but irrespective of whatever country you are living in, are being directed towards what are considered capital intensive expenditure. So you will see, even if you work in universities, public or private, the university administration is more interested in building fancy new athletic centers, but not hiring faculty and staff and so on and so forth. So here we are. Not everything's bad. As when it comes to the Indian Constitution, it remains a singular hope and a very important guardrail for a large number of marginalized communities in India. And also it influences conversations elsewhere in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and so on. Parts of the system, parts of the social protection infrastructure for reading, for supporting that kind of associated living, which we think of when we think about democracy, or when we think about sort of the cafe culture in Europe that Jürgen Habermas and others have talked about, do exist. But there is a massive, massive gap by the time you reach college. Let me back up a little bit. India's general enrollment at the level of college itself is roughly around 20%. So most students actually are dropping out as soon as the government support for free and compulsory education declines after the age of 14, right? And for the few who are somehow able to get to college and beyond, there are no libraries after you exit your school university. And even those libraries, and I'll discuss a little bit there, are in not very good condition. Internationally, because India is a large country, its numbers, when not paired with its population density and population, look very large. But they are not large compared to what the requirement of the problem is. Okay, so it is in this context, some decade, 15 years ago, a established novelist organizer and her partner, Mridula Koshi and Michael, started the Community Library Project in Delhi as a humble effort to start addressing this problem. The Community Library Project is based in Delhi and runs 4 libraries now and caters to roughly around 15,000 members. Small but meaningful, and a community that has been carefully built over the last decade or so, and a community that covers large number of internal migrants from even poorer parts of India, families who come to Delhi in search of economic and other opportunities. But also, as some of you may know, Delhi is also home to a large number of undocumented refugees and asylum seekers in the region, and a sizable expat community of students and others from various countries in Africa. And so the Community Library Project is based in a neighborhood called Kirki. I'm going to try and take you to Khirki now. Now, like I said, Delhi is a city of roughly 30 million people. We are in Khirki neighborhood as I zoom in here. The neighborhood itself is, you're looking at some 100,000 people. I may be missing, maybe it's not 100,000, 10,000, but that's what I'm missing. The library is set up somewhere here, as you can see. And the library caters to the daycare centers in the community, because the daycare centers, which are supposed to be funded by the government and should also have toys and learning and teaching materials, etc., do not really have those. So the library project actually ends up supporting and doing the work of the government. Similarly, you will see here the colleges as well as skilling institutions in the neighborhood, such as the Vocational Studies College or the other college, also do not offer libraries to their enrolled students, which is their responsibility. And so these college students also inevitably end up relying on the community library project. And there are other details that I cannot get into, but this neighborhood, because of Delhi's partition history, circa 1947-48, also hosts some of the residents who had to be rehabilitated when they were leaving Pakistan for India, etc., and they ended up here. So some of the poorest residents of Delhi are also in this neighborhood. Now let's zoom out a little bit. And if you see here, Aramb in Hindi means beginning. So this is a newly branded library system that the Delhi government is trying to set up. But what we have seen is that these libraries are largely glorified reading rooms. So they'll have fancy building, like I was saying earlier, the promise of internet facility, but no book collection. Because what these reading rooms are actually catering to, and exorbitant membership fees, because what these reading rooms are essentially catering to, what the political class is interested in catering to, is an aspiration of India's youth to get into government services, government jobs, by cracking extremely difficult, Chinese Gaokao style difficult entrance exams, which are about sorting, where you could score 1 mark less or 1 mark more, and that could determine your future. But it means nothing in what's happening to questions of fraternity, liberty, equality, and so on, that democracies tell us that they care about. If you go further out, there are two older Delhi Public Library. Now, for those of you who may remember, Delhi Public Library was a UNESCO project started in the 50s, and it was supposed to act as a vision and a model for all of Asia and potentially Africa. So while the project has never really expanded, its initial ambition was good enough that a library of 35 branches does exist. But think about the city. It's a city of 30 millions. I've been living in Toronto for the better part of last decade. Toronto is 3 million, 1/10 of Delhi. Toronto's library system spends almost $300 million per year. I'm forgetting the numbers on Delhi, but Delhi only has 30 branches, and a lot of those branches are defunct. If you go to them, you will find a building, probably a security guard, but the doors are locked. So that's where we are, and it is in this context that the library project has been able to defiantly serve the community. If Masam were here, she could tell you very good stories about how we have seen individuals who entered, including Masam herself, who entered as kids in class 5 or class 6 and have used the library, benefited from it, and not only read, become readers, and become part of the Indian Democratic Republic, but also had opportunities for social mobility that are not otherwise available given how the Indian political economy is now structured. And that political economy is fundamentally informed by the structure and infrastructure of caste. Far away from an identity problem, it is a deep structure of violence that continues through the paltry allocation of funds for social services which the political and bureaucratic elites know the oppressed minorities. These are political minorities, but numerical majorities. So think of a South Africa-style apartheid system, not an America-style, minority-majority system. Okay, I just wanted to do a quick time check. May I know, Lily, how much time do I have left? Is it 5 minutes?
Actually, you are finishing your time, but you can go for 4 minutes, maybe.
Okay, in that
So
case,
we
let me
need to
just.
finish our webinar at 8. So we will need
Okay.
to have some time for Q&A.
Okay. So I'm going to cut then right to the end, and try to bring all of us to our bleeding present. I'm sure that a lot of us are both following the human stupidity that's taking over. The Human Stupidity Project is intimately involved with what we have been discussing so far, because the focus is on cognitive labor, right? A lot of these robots that are being promised, they are not interested in, we are not building robots to say clean our sewage systems so that humans, and by the way, in India, manual scavenging is considered a hereditary occupation. It's a offense which is considered criminal, but you will find city services and city governments in India continue to employ humans to deal with human shit with bare hands without any protective gear. We are not interested in addressing that. We want robots to write Hollywood scripts and so on and so forth. So the question on caste, or the problem of caste, is intimately relatable in the consistent and persistent distinction that we make worldwide about cognitive labor versus manual labor, right? I want to end with two final slides. Even when I was growing up, probably 15 years or so ago, the marker of distinction between who was well off and who wasn't had begun to be about access to computers. Before I transitioned, or rather lapsed, into anthropology and the social sciences, I trained as a computer engineer, where programming is central. And much like in music and sports, the earlier your parents started teaching you C++ and Python, the better your chances were to ruin the world, like Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg, right? But increasingly, what we are seeing among elites today and in elite behaviors, the idea is not so much to provide access, but to cut access, right? So, but when it comes to public policy programming for the large majority, whether it is politicians, bureaucrats, or Nobel laureates in economics, we want to dump these hardware and software devices, but not invest in library services, library staff, teachers, teaching services, and so on and so forth, right? So we want to solve the problem of lack of quality teachers by giving a personal adaptive learning to kids in schools without teachers. Instead of relying and building libraries, we want to give the mirage of continuous availability of audiobooks and other ebooks without acknowledging that reading is a social activity in which people need to be socialized before they can become independent readers, right? So the FLN network has been working on this problem to the extent that we can. I hope this QR code works. We have put together what we are calling a People's National Library Policy for India. We continue to work in advocacy and working with politicians and bureaucrats, hoping that the graph, the map I showed earlier, the situation changes in India. And lastly, it's an open invitation to join us. As they say, even India's independence movement had a lot of foreigners in the good spirit. So we like to be cosmopolitan, and whoever of you is interested, back to what Michelle was saying, we are happy to work with you, even if you are, say, working somewhere in Ireland or somewhere, but want to better understand the South Asian community there. In general, open to chat. Thanks so much. And my apologies if I went over time.
Thank you so much, Akash, for this great presentation and giving very great perspective on IFLA, on library networks in India project. This is really great project. So again, thank you to all of you for these informative presentations. Without a further ado, I'm going for Q&A. Please, everyone, put your questions on Q&A. So I'm starting for the first questions. It says, the first question is, given the fact that Myrdal has mentioned the world caste in his famous stone, The American Dilemma, to highlight the rigid social hierarchy and the deep state systematic discrimination against the Afro-Americans. Do you libraries as a social infrastructures globally should work in concert with one another to evolve a common modus operandi of library programming to fight his insidiously growing conquer all caste. So who is taking this question?
I mean, I will just jump in and say, yes, I 100% agree. I think this is kind of like with my call to action. I think there needs to be a concerted effort and we need to join together. And not just library programming. I think it's much more than that. And that's one piece of it. And I really appreciate hearing more about the Free Libraries Network, because I think that also gives us some ideas and maybe collaborative opportunities too, not only in our spaces in the US or in America, but also looking, working with IFLA further. So I would definitely say yes to that. And I will be emailing you, Arjun. So
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. Dr. Jangam or Akash, would you like to add something on this question?
Just a resounding yes.
I think, yeah, same thing, I think I also agree with what Michelle said. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So one question for you, Akash, that about the discrepancy between IFLA's world map, which counts every school as having a library, whereas these libraries are not only not public, that everyone cannot come, but they are often not open to children in the schools where they supposedly exist. So if you have, because she or he says that, Akash.
Yeah, I could take this up. So I think naturally IFLA being a sort of international body, and given how the international system works with, questions of sovereignty and so on and so forth, probably IFLA cannot work as an audit organization, right? And thus it has to accept the data that individual countries and country-related library organizations are submitting. But what we have seen, especially in the Indian context, is that one slide that, for example, I couldn't go through is that about 89% of school libraries in India report that they have a library, but there is no data available on librarians since 2017. And the availability of data on librarians in 2017 shows that the maximum availability of librarians is some 20-25% in a given province. So there could be libraries which are rooms with books in it, but they could be locked. And when you look at the number of public libraries in India, that number is arrived at by adding all school libraries. But the thing about school libraries in India is that even if they have public schools, they are not open to those not enrolled at those institutions, and they are not open to those enrolled students even after hours, right? So they should actually not feature as public libraries. And when you remove a lot of these uh, data points, the number of libraries in India, even the absolute number, shrinks even further. So that much I could sort of respond. And I think perhaps Stephen or somebody from IFLA is also typing an answer. I'll let them
Yes,
type in,
yes,
and we can
Stephen,
move to the
the external
other
diet.
questions, I guess.
Yeah, but I also want to add something, like, as
Yeah, please.
Akash is saying, like, even I'm familiar with Telangana University libraries, like Osman University, Kakata University, all these university libraries. Libraries exist, but there are no librarians. And many times, these are completely neglected, and, not much is being, done in terms of new acquisitions and even journals access. And, these are all university libraries, not normal public libraries or anything. So there is a systemic neglect on the part of the government not to invest in, libraries. And I think this is a very important problem elites are, creating for the society.
And may I
Thank
just
you.
add a little bit
Yes,
to what Shina said?
yeah,
I
please.
think if you look at just with the general debate on industrialization, deindustrialization, and post-industrialization, if you look at, say, the West broadly conceived, Germany, Canada, United States, these are countries which had a period of industrialization before jobs started going to Asia and elsewhere. Similarly, these are countries which built out public schools, which built out, I mean, the US example is the famous Carnegie Endowment, but other countries had other modes of funding library institutions before the world overall got caught up in the promise of the digital. The predicament of those of us in the global south, and fortunately or unfortunately, we are the majority of the humanity, is that we have had to deindustrialize or pick up policies through structural adjustment programs and so on, and shift our attention to digital without ever having had the time or resources to invest in that physical base structure, right? Now, I'm not trying to sort of hierarchicalize that physical comes before the digital, but it is valuable to have a real building or a library campus before you get into fancy Wi-Fi services and so on, right? So the promise of the digital as a means to leapfrog all sorts of other base things has got the global south really caught in this bind, where it wants to move to 6G and 7G, but there are, students who cannot read. And so that's a even bigger.
Thank you, Akash. So, Dr. Janagam, this question is for you, but it has two parts. First, I'm asking first part. I would like to know more about your work co-founding Southern in Canada and the argument framing caste discrimination as a human right issues. This is the first part. You are muted.
I read Murdula's questions. It's two parts. One is about archives, other one is about Southern. Southern, came just before the COVID. We founded this because one of the important aspect about diaspora in Canada, particularly Canada and also US, is that this whole idea that Indians are unified and in the sense homogeneous communities and everyone loves the Diwali and all these celebrations. And the second thing is that the entire presentation of diasporic culture is very Brahmanical. And another important thing, as migration from different communities into South Asia, so from South Asian backgrounds are coming, we notice that even children are being bullied in schools on the basis of caste, like in Toronto school board, also even in Vancouver. And many cases have come, and one of the important problem we found that there were no advocacy groups which bring in this issue of caste discrimination to forefront. That's when I met this friend of mine, Vijay Puli, and we thought yeah, so we founded this organization. One of the important things we did is that we did this very important campaign in Toronto District School Board, requesting them to recognize caste discrimination as part of along with race and other forms of discrimination. So then TDSB referred this motion to Ontario Human Rights Commission, which actually did a very interesting investigation, and also they came up with this policy framework to address the question of caste discrimination in schools. And now it's in fact in Ontario, now even both in private and public sector, you can report on the basis of caste discrimination, and there is a process through which this issue can be dealt with. In fact, as part of this, we are also conducting a survey on caste in Canada. And also now we are just finishing on Ontario. Now we are expanding this to all of Canada to find out what actually, how does caste look in Canada, and we are trying to publish a report on it. And regarding archives, I want to tell you a very interesting experience I had. This was in 2001 when I got a scholarship and went to do PhD in England. And I remember the first week after meeting my research supervisor, I went to British Library. As usual, anyone wants to write on South Asia will go to British Library. So I went to the British Library and I took my membership and went up into this Oriental Office collections, basically the South Asia collections. And I went at the desk and I asked, I want to talk to someone who deals with the South Asia collections. And they pointed me out to this lady who is supposed to be the in charge of all South Indian collections. So I went innocently to her and said, Madam, I came from India just 1 week, not even a 1 week, and I want to. So she said, what is your topic of research? I said, I'm writing on Dalit history in Telugu country. Then she immediately asked me, oh, do you mean to say scheduled caste? I said, yes, I'm writing on the scheduled caste in Telugu country. And she said, there is nothing on scheduled caste here. You should go back to India. And then I was like, it's a collapse for me, like it completely, I come all the way from India to British Library and I hear this from a librarian. Then I went back to my professor and told him that this is what the lady said, in charge lady. Then he told me that, no, you came all the way and you know what you want to do, so you go and read the catalogs of the library and find what actually is available on the list in the library. So 4 months I sat and read the catalogs in British Library, and for my shock, I found that every manuscript and every pamphlet written in Telugu on Dalis is available in British Library. So there is this, even in libraries, you see that based on caste, people discriminate. And she refused to cooperate with me or help me or guide me. And that's why, as Michelle said, like librarians are like key especially in helping people to find and also building collections, and also how equitable access is very central to the idea of access of knowledge as a democratic right to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm taking one question for Michelle. We have some more questions, but just very quickly, how do you see caste becoming a protected category across US states, given the country's federal system? What more would a library have to do to design for caste discrimination in a state where caste is not a protected category? And second, what do you think are the challenges of dealing with South Asian communities, seeing as a South Asia elites are also shifting towards the Republican Party?
That's like 5 questions in 1 minute.
I
So
know.
okay, I guess I'll address the first one, and the other two I'd be happy to. If that person, Manshika, can, I hope I said your name right, please email me or give me your email. So let me scroll back up. Where to go? How do I see caste becoming a protected category across US? So this is very challenging right now, given the state of our political climate and our federal system, period, and so many things going on with diversity, equity, and inclusion. I actually think start smaller and more local. You can start at the local level first and then move to your state level. So I think that's a first in. Because if we start at the federal level, it's going to take a lot of effort, a lot of time, and is not likely going to happen under our current administration. So I will just say that. But I would love to answer your other questions in more detail, but I know we're at the end of our time. So thank you. I got your email. I'll email you.
Thank you. We have some more questions, but since we are just running out the time, so I suggest our Michelle already put her email on the chat box. So, Mr. Janagam and Akash, you also please put your email so our participant could directly email you regarding the question. I think this would be a really best way. Thank you so much. So I would like to thank on behalf of Library Service to the Multicultural Population Section Research and Action Committee and Free Libraries Network India. Thanks to all of our speakers and also participants and attendees for joining this webinar. Thank you so much. It was really great webinar and very informative topic, I know, for everybody. So thank you everyone, and thank you to our speakers, and thank you to Stephen. He is on backside, so for coordinating this really. Thank you so much everyone, and have a great time. See you.
Thank you all, and Jai Bhim, and thank you again for this opportunity. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.